Pam Bondi accepted the invitation to discuss legal issues, justice, and her tenure as Florida's Attorney General, being well acquainted with high-pressure situations and the tough conversations that may surround them. The former Attorney General of Florida knew just what she was signing up for the moment she accepted the invite for the interview. The show host, however, was twice as prepared compared to his usual interviews. He had sharpened his choice of words to make clean cuts into Pam's reputation and leave her questioning her judgment. A narrative was already set, and the questions were shaped to twist her responses so they fit the set narrative. Does Pam walk away from this unscathed? Does her host's sharp words leave her bleeding out? Or what unexpected outcome would become of this live TV drama? Let's find out. On a cool evening in Florida, Pam Bondi received an unexpected interview invite via her mail. It was from the renowned political TV host Randy Orleans. Pam Bondi had never been one to back out of a fight before it even started, so she accepted it. Several narratives had been painted about her, and this particular host wanted to seal the deal using her own words. However, she knowingly obliged. She had decided to indulge him. As the days drew near, she was sure to do her homework on the host. According to her philosophy, there's nothing as defeating as facing an opposition without being armed with enough foreknowledge about it. She had learned the specifics about his tactics, his personality, and measures of desperation. The show host was a very persistent interrogator who rarely backed down once he had set out to trap someone. He had a reputation for turning interviews into public trial sessions. Those who fall prey usually end up discrediting themselves with their own words. Time passed swiftly, and the day of the interview arrived. On the set of the live TV show, the producer and the rest of the crew were preparing to start recording. Pam arrived in good time, as was her policy, and she took notice of the environment around her. The demeanor of the producer, the videographers, and everyone else was cold. She had expected that the host was out for her neck. However, to find that the rest of the crew were in on it was something else. Looking at the audience, which was already settled, she could sense their anticipation for something unusual. A fight, a brawl, a heated exchange. They were expecting some sort of drama. Pam smiled inwardly as she took in the environment in which she now found herself. She was not about to lose feet, but the atmosphere was agitated. Randy Orleans made his way to Pam and offered a greeting with his hand stretched out for a handshake. Pam smiled disarmingly as she took the handshake. Randy's smile was rather stiff, and they didn't reach his eyes. He gave a brief nod as she responded to his greeting. They walked from behind the camera and approached the interview desk together. They both sat in the spotlight before the camera. However, Pam felt like the spotlight was boring, specifically to her. A show was about to go down, and the host thought he had it all wrapped. Sitting on the stage, with the host before her and the audience around her, everything seemed calm for a start, but Pam knew better. Being very sensitive to her environment, she could tell that the atmosphere was suffocating, like it was meant to drown her. However, she was used to keeping her head above water. She looked again at the audience, this time briefly. She could see their eager faces and body expressions under the dim illumination. Some of them mirrored skepticism, others leaned forward in their seats. The suspenseful anticipation was thick. Pam had been at the receiving end of scrutiny many times. She had been on television severally, debated many high-profile cases, stood for some controversial policies, and even faced crowds of reporters. But this time felt different from most before it. The quiet tension in the air sent a warning message even before a word was spoken. Randy Orleans sat across from her. With his reputation for pushing his guests to their limits, Pam could only imagine what he had coming. Although Pam had done an assignment on Randy, she was not planning on using the things she gathered verbally. They were more to prepare her mind for his attacks. She had reminded herself that this was not a court session, but an interview. 3, 2, 1. The producer called out, and at his command, the red lights flickered on, and the recording began. Pam smiled warmly as she crossed her hands on the table, staring at her host. Randy smirked in response. His arrogance was almost palpable. "Pam, welcome to the show," he began. She nodded briefly in response and said, "Thank you for having me on the show." In a bid to mask his true intentions, the show host began with light talk about some non-controversial policies. Pam responded and offered insights professionally, displaying her intellectual prowess. The temperature of the room, which had been feverishly high, dropped by a few degrees as they started conversing. Just when it seemed like things were looking too good to go sour, Randy changed the tempo of the interview. Pam didn't let down her guard at all. She knew what tactic he was playing. He wanted to disarm her, make her feel comfortable with his questions, then strike when she was least expecting. However, Pam had anticipated this. It was not a strategy he used in most of his interviews, except for high-profile political cases. Thus, her responses were thoughtful and calculated, reflecting her sound knowledge and judgment. The tension in the audience, which was starting to diffuse gradually, suddenly pumped up again. He started subtly by making a rather obvious point in an insinuating tone and topping it with an emotional question to stir the audience. As the Attorney General, you enjoyed enormous privileges. However, I believe that you must have experienced some downtimes too, right? He said with feigned sympathy. Pam could see through it and knew just where he was headed. As it is with life in many other professions, it's no different at all, she said, smiling. The degree of intensity may vary, though, but she continued to say, but Randy cut her off unexpectedly and with a more pointed question. Feeling like she was enjoying the interview way too much, he was about to get to his main focus. Pam smiled faintly as she noticed what he had done. She knew that more biting questions would follow, so she steadied herself to answer them. Have you ever had sleepless nights when considering a verdict you enforced, or, perhaps, a policy you passed that affected harmless citizens more than it alleviated their struggle? He asked, smiling coyly. The energy in the room shifted slightly, and murmurs began to spread across the room. Pam straightened in her seat, preparing to respond, but he cut her off just as she opened her mouth to speak. You know the law has a cutting edge that is quite severe for any at its receiving end. Justice, however, tries to balance the weights so that only those deserving of the harsh reality of the law are made to face it. He paused, staring briefly into the camera like he was on a show to seek justice for the oppressed. Turning to Pam, he added questioningly, however, when innocent people are made to face the severity of the law and the guilty go free, that would mean that the balance is tilted wrongly. What becomes of the harmless citizens wrongly accused? Have you ever thought about that? He asked with a cold, pointed gaze. Given that he had interrupted her previously, Pam took a breath before attempting to respond. She leaned forward and began to speak. Law and justice are... She was interrupted again, this time more rudely. The murmurs from the audience were louder now. The energy in the room shifted, obviously. What started as a friendly conversation was turning into a live trial, an unjust one. Pam remained calm, her composure unwavering. She smiled as she raised her hand gently, a gesture to stop Randy in his tracks. With a graceful smile on her face, she asked lightly, Is it going to be a monologue from here on? Or are you going to allow me the chance to answer the questions you're asking? Randy was slightly taken aback by her demeanor and approach to the new direction of the interview. He was trying to rile her up so she'd lose her composure and fall into his trap. However, she was not only handling it gracefully, but also exuding warmth and controlled power during the process. No coldness or defensive streak was rolling off her. While he was recalibrating to fire back, she added in a laughing tone, Unless you don't want my response, perhaps your script does not have room for my input, and my answers are interruptions to your written plot. The audience chuckled lightly, but it was a strained one. The air grew thick with anticipation as eyes were set on Randy, awaiting his response. Of course not, it's a dialogue, he said with a half-hearted laugh. The humor, however, did nothing to alleviate the growing tension. All right then. You asked if I ever have sleepless nights considering the effects of certain verdicts and policies on citizens. I'd start by saying that every decision and policy I have stood for has been for the betterment and best interest of our citizens. The law supports what it is, and not everyone might like it, and my job is to uphold the law. She stated profoundly. Bearing laws that serve as shields, we also have to bear the backlash from the people, she concluded. The audience cheered lightly at the intelligence behind her responses, which irritated the host. She was making a good impression on the audience, the opposite of what he had intended. He had his next moves planned. He was not about to back down. He smiled sinisterly as he continued. Very well, Pam, you're making quite the impression on my audience. He stressed the possessive pronoun emphatically, as though to make it a point that he was in charge. Pam gave a modest smile in response. You're the host, Randy. I'm only responding to your prompts. Without giving her a chance to speak further or elaborate on the other questions and insinuations he had raised, he continued his attack. His next line of questions, comments, and tone made it clear that he had an agenda to turn the interview against Pam. With a sharp tone and accusing questions, he painted a controversial image of Pam Pondi to the audience. Attempting to stir her to become defensive, he also interrupted most of her responses before she could make a clear point. He was expecting her to stop him pointedly, or with a gesture like she did earlier, but with annoyance and a desire to clear her name. Pam, however, chose not to match his aggression, but to use a different approach. She knew something that he ignored. The more she allowed him to talk, the deeper he dug a pit for himself. A pit that would be hard for him to climb out of in the long run. Pam had decided to let him speak for as long as he wanted without interrupting him. She wasn't going to give him the incriminating interruption to defend herself like he wanted. At some point, Pam had leaned back comfortably in her seat to watch the spectacle he was putting up before her. After challenging her records and past decisions severally, he was almost out of breath. "Over to you, Pam. What do you have to say for yourself?" His tone revealed exhaustion from talking extensively, but it still had a biting edge to it. If only he knew that he had ticked off the time bomb he set from the beginning of the show. Pam was about to blow his mind and his cover. "Again, thank you for the chance to speak. It's an opportunity to clarify a lot of what you have said." She was just about to continue when the host forcefully tapped his fingers against the table to rattle her and interrupt her flow. Before he could say anything, Pam spoke up. "Mr. Orleans, you just turned the conversation over to me, asking me what I had to say." She stared at him pointedly. "Are you still not going to allow me to respond? Would you rather continue with the monologue you've been going about for the last 12 minutes? She asked as she stared obviously at the clock. Randy smiled tightly as he reiterated, "Over to you, Pam." Despite his oozing arrogance and attempt at intimidation, she remained calm and kept her smiles warm, not letting her expression falter even once. Except for the look of curiosity and innocent confusion she switched between while he spoke. Speaking with clarity and confidence, Pam broke down the facts involved in the claims the host had made. Her speech was laced with irrefutable evidence and precise citations that the audience was referring to while she spoke. Many bring out their phones to confirm and make affirmative gestures and sounds in agreement. To Randy's dismay, Pam was gradually exposing his misleading claims. Randy had spoken about many topics all at once in a bid to have Pam in a tight spot. Pam, however, had turned the tables on him, but she wasn't done, and neither was he. His frustration was leading him now, and although persistent, his tactics did not have the desired effects. Following his nature of persistence in trying to push his guest to their limit of tolerance, he raised his most controversial and accusing questions yet. Although he had previously questioned her work ethic and the motive behind certain decisions she made, he repeated it but did so more specifically this time. "You have been in the legal world for years, Pam. As a consultant, a prosecutor, an attorney general, having a lot of power and influence." He paused, staring at her pointedly as he intended to drive his questions home. "You spoke a lot about facts, so now, considering these facts, I have two questions for you. Pam, could you honestly tell this audience that you came out of every controversy spotless because you were truly faultless, or did power and influence come into play to save the day for you?" This was a cleverly set up trap. Pam understood the tactics behind his trap. If she were to deny it, it would appear dishonest, and an admittance on her part would be twisted regardless of any following explanation she gave. The only way out, Pam thought, was to do neither. Fresh anticipation stirred up within the audience. Eagerly, they waited for her response. Pam leaned into the table slightly, an unfaltering smile on her face. She stared pointedly at Randy and said, "Several controversies surrounded my career, and, like I said earlier, holding the knife and the shield of justice means receiving backlash from the people. If you are accusing me of manipulating my way out of a particular controversy, you should be specific and not dance around it. The law operates by proofs and specifics, both of which even I am subject to." Randy was at a loss and sat speechless for a moment. He couldn't mention just any controversy by speculation without proof. Left without a comeback from her response, he proceeded to corner her into responding either of the two ways he had originally intended to trap her by. Smiling, he said, "Pam, you so cleverly dodged my question. Is this how you always twist narratives to suit you?" Pam inhaled slowly, pausing for effect before responding. "I have answered every single one of your questions directly and respectfully, even adding questions where I sought clarity on the shady details you mentioned. You, however, have resorted to avoiding the questions that didn't sit well with your script and twisting the narrative to suit yourself." Pam responded in a calm yet firm and commanding tone. The audience murmured in approval as they took in the whole scene. Randy's confidence was cracked now, and everyone could see it. Avoiding Pam's pointed gaze, Randy tried to flip through the papers he held using a diversion technique. He wanted to change the topic and regain control of the narrative. However, the second option seemed to be off the table, as his audience seemed to be reasoning from Pam's perspective. Still bent on seeing it through to the third question and saving face, he continued, "I'm just the guy asking the tough questions, Pam, not the enemy." He smiled. Pam smiled knowingly and nodded in agreement as he continued. "People want transparency. Speaking about law and ethics, would you say that you have never made a decision that was politically inclined in your favor?" Pam sighed, exhaling gracefully as she responded, "If you are insinuating that my past verdicts and decisions were based on anything else other than the law and its ethics, then you're either misinformed or intentionally misleading your audience. Which is it, Randy?" She stared at him with sincere curiosity. "I'll say it again that every decision has been based on the law, its ethics, and what is right for the people I serve. If you firmly believe otherwise, then perhaps we should let the law decide between us." Randy Orleans opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words, and once again, he was visibly lost for words. Randy sat dazed for a moment as Pam added, "I know I may not be playing by your script as you may have preferred. However, I'm not going to put up with some baseless accusations just to provide you with headlines that click. No, Randy, I'm not here to dish out a soundbite." She exhaled again as she finally said, "If you're still interested in a factual conversation, I'd be happy to oblige. Otherwise—" She left the statement open as she leaned back into her seat, smiling. The audience had their eyes glued on Pam, her every word and every move. Randy snapped out of his daze in time to put up a feigned hospitality as he said, "You're the guest today, Pam. Please don't take this the wrong way. I apologize for any misinterpretation. Let's continue." Pam nodded slightly, saying, "I don't think I or the audience misinterpreted you at any point, but it's all right. Let's go on." She smiled. Torn between being desperate to save face and appealing to Pam, he framed his last question between both. "In your own words, what would you tell us about your career in leadership, Pam? Do you think you handled everything in your career with perfection?" Leaning forward again, Pam responded with confidence and precision, her composure not cracking. "I would say that perfection does not define leadership. Integrity does. Along with it, we need the ability to stand by the decisions we've made, to see the lessons in each challenge, and always to strive to do what is right. These are my factors for defining leadership. Concerning holding people accountable to these standards, I'm without regrets for the decisions and actions I took in my career and leadership." At this point, the audience was on its feet, erupting with loud applause. Even the host, who had been humbled, now stared at Pam with newfound respect. Randy smiled weakly as he stood to his feet, offering her a handshake. "Thank you for being on the show." Pam stood up too. "Thanks again for having me," she replied. The red lights went off, and the live session was over, but not the audience. Loud cheers filled the room as they all celebrated Pam for how she navigated the discussion. Before Pam could exit the room, the internet was already buzzing with many cheers for Pam and some criticism of the host. Reporters and journalists crowded the space outside, awaiting her exit. It had been a win for Pam. She had not only left the interview unscathed, but also victorious. As a guest, she countered hostility with grace, refusing to let herself be bullied. Pam's story blew the internet and became a trending topic even months after the incident. Many lessons were drawn from it. Even those who did not support her political views had to admit that she handled herself and the situation well openly. People took note of how she never resorted to using demeaning words or condescending tactics, taking lessons from it. She showed that strength does not emanate from aggression, hostility, or shouting. Instead, it came from an ability to remain unshaken in the face of adversity, founded on knowledge and confidence. She won by intelligence, undeniable facts, and composure, demonstrating why she's remained a formidable force in her career line. If you found this video inspiring and insightful, share the lessons you have picked from it in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. Also, turn on the notification bell so you'll be notified about similar content and can watch our other videos as displayed on your screen. Thank you.